Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the latest in banned deck technology. And for today's deck tech, before this whole event wraps up, I wanted to do at least one more mini deck tech before we go back to our standard schedule. So in this format, of course, we're going to take advantage of some cards that I'm personally fond of myself, but again, the cards themselves, aside from maybe just one specific card, aren't really actually all that scary in this format. This is mostly a pet deck of mine that I'm really excited to actually play in this format. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into Boros Burn. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content so you don't miss out on any of the gameplay, booster pack openings, deck decks, and so much more. So as always, before we get started into the actual main part of the deck, we're going to cover, of course, the stats as always. So we are, of course, working with Boros colors of white and red. Primarily, it is a red deck with a splash of white. We're looking at about a mana curve of about 2.1, which does look a little high for a burn deck, but trust me, again, it'll work out when I explain it. We're looking at 12 creatures in the deck with 8 instants, 16 sorceries, 4 enchantments, and 20 lands to round it out. Now, the simple question we're going to ask, of course, is what makes Boros Burn so much more unique and interesting versus just regular straight-up burn?
Good question!
Well, the simple fact of the matter is we're, of course, going to take advantage of cards that are not available normally in Historic. Specifically, however, there's actually one card that actually you can play in Historic, but because of how this format is designed, I figured we can actually play this card, and I actually don't have to spend the wild cards on it. So, without further ado, let's talk about the main star of the show, Lightning Helix. Lightning Helix is a 2-mana white and red instant that simply says you deal 3 damage to any target and you gain 3 life. Not anything super crazy here, but again, I love this card because of how quickly it can either burn out something on the field, you can go to face, and also it helps stabilize you with that little bit of life gain. In a game like Magic, gaining 3 life can mean the difference between surviving another turn or otherwise losing, so that's why, of course, I love the card. The other main card in the deck that kind of helps puts it all together is Fiery Inscription. This 3-mana enchantment reads, when Fiery Inscription enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Fiery Inscription deals 2 damage to each opponent. So this is what makes the deck a little bit more unique versus some of the other burn decks we have out there. Because of how this deck is designed, and of course of how the format is, we definitely want to try to stretch out our burn as much as we can, so Fiery Inscription really helps us increase the power level of our burn. And otherwise, with that out of the way, we're simply going to go over again our cards. We only have, of course, a couple of creatures in the deck. Dragon's Rage Channeler, we've talked about this card in the past, so we won't go over it again. I also just recently talked about Ragavan Nimble Pilferer. They're both powerful cards, and of course they can unleash their full potential in this format. The only other creature we have in the deck that we actually don't want to really cast, because we're going to try to take advantage of our spell slinging, is Arclight Phoenix. We've talked about this in the past, but for those of you who haven't seen it before, Arclight Phoenix is a 4-mana Phoenix 3/2 that has flying and haste. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you cast 3 or more instant or sorcery spells this turn, return the Phoenix from the graveyard to the battlefield. So ideally, taking advantage of Dragon Rage Channeler's Surveil ability, if you see the Phoenix on top of your deck, you just dump it in there. You can then take advantage of our other cards, such as Faithless Looting, to throw away Arclight Phoenixes, and then hopefully set up your next big turn. So otherwise, the game plan is pretty simple. Just cast off as many burn spells as you can, hit your opponent, and make it all go to face, and as you hopefully close out the game, you can finish them off with an Arclight Phoenix or 2 that'll just come back after you spell sling just enough. If you have a Fiery Inscription by the final part of it, you actually could also save up your burn if you absolutely need to, and otherwise just fire off a ton of stuff. What really helps, of course, is Fiery Inscription will also take advantage of our cards such as Light Up the Stage, and as mentioned earlier, the Faithless Looting, to ensure that as we keep drawing through our deck to find more answers, we can still keep pinging our opponent without losing any momentum. So that's actually why I love utilizing this card. The other reason why Fiery Inscription normally would not be in a burn deck, because mostly you want to try to fixate yourself on actual burn just to go to face, is because of the fact that Ragavan can create a treasure token. This helps us, of course, not lose a turn by having to cast the Fiery Inscription and then waste that turn without having to burn any of our opponent. But otherwise, the other main attraction, of course, to Boros Burn is we'll take advantage of Sunbaked Canyons. Simply put, this land allows us just to sacrifice it when we need to draw a card. This, of course, will trigger off Dragon's Rage Channeler's secondary ability, which is the Delirium, allowing it to pump up itself up to become a 3/3 and also deal some more damage to help close out the game even faster. Otherwise, that's mostly it for the deck. It's not going to be anything super crazy. Burn is what it is. Of course, as I mentioned, we will use the most efficient burn we have. Skewer the Critics. Ideally, make sure to cast this for just the 1 mana. Same with the Light of the Stage, taking advantage of the Spectacle ability. Besides Lightning Helix in the 2-drop slot, you have Static Discharge. As always, I'm not a fan of Alchemy cards, but the fact is, let's be honest, this card, of course, gets incrementally much more powerful as the game goes on. So if you do have to drag it out, this plus a Fiery Inscription can close out the game, usually in 1 or 2 burn spells. And of course, the one, the only Lightning Bolt. Since this is the no ban historic format, we have to take advantage of utilizing this card. Otherwise, the only other small little bits of burn besides taking advantage of cards such as Sunbaked Canyon, Sacred Foundry, and Inspiring Vantage as your dual lands is Ramunap Ruins, of course, in the late game can help you, of course, close out by doing a little extra burn damage to stretch out your lands and take advantage of the fact that you may get flooded awkwardly enough, even though we only have 20 lands. But otherwise, that's the game plan for you. Now, of course, the tips I do want to give you if you do want to play the deck is, obviously, your turn 1 plays, you're going to want to get one of your creatures out. So either get that Dragon's Rage Channeler out, get that Ragavan out as soon as possible. Mostly in this format, they probably won't likely have any kind of removal from the very first turn. So this means that we should be able to get advantage of Dragon's Rage Channeler's ability or Ragavan to hopefully draw a treasure. And then this way we can then cast our Fiery Inscription. Once the Fiery Inscription is out, you definitely want to be aggressive with digging through your deck for answers, because remember that you won't get punished for the fact that it's out there. In fact, it takes advantage of those card draw spells. So if you cast off, say, that Faithless Looting, which can then trigger off the ping ability of it, which can then turn on Spectacle, allowing you to light up the stage, skewer the Critic, and go right into Arclight Phoenix as soon as possible to do a ton of damage. Does this mean that, of course, that you basically be susceptible and weak to the combo decks in the format? Yes, of course, but we don't really care about that, because remember, this is a fun format, and again, we're just trying to get through our wins and be as aggressive as possible, taking advantage of some of the fun cards in this format. Speaking of aggression, remember that the majority of your burn, of course, when you do play a burn deck, should be going ideally to face, unless if there's a threat in front of you that is much more of a bigger issue than actually burning out your opponent, such as, say, life gain creatures. That might be a better option for you. If you do have a Fiery Inscription out, this does mean that you can sometimes do that burn damage to a creature. This gives you a little bit more wiggle room instead of just kind of going straight to face. However, just make sure to kind of do the math first in your head, because you obviously don't want those moments where you might awkwardly take out a creature, but that burn probably could have gone to face and could have closed out the game on the next turn. So I'm not going to say I'm obviously the best at math when it comes to burn decks.
As long as you can do basic math, you'll be fine.
If you can get at least 20 damage to their face, assuming they have no other way of gaining life or adjusting their life, you mostly can win this obviously on as fast as turn 3. Sometimes turn 4 is most likely what's going to happen, but turn 3 is what you ideally want to shoot for in a burn deck. Of course, remember that how this format's designed, you most likely won't get that, but it still can be very fun and satisfying if you pull it off. But otherwise, my only other final thoughts I want to say on the deck and this format in total is I actually had so much fun in this format, and I really hope that Wizards will take the data that they got from all the matches that have been put out there. I obviously wanted to hopefully see Lightning Bolt get unbanned. I obviously don't expect the Monkey to enter into historic or even an unbanned crazy style of format. So again, we're just trying to have as much fun with it while we still can. But don't worry, for those of you that are still watching the video, I will do much more in-depth deck techs once we get to Wilds of Eldraine, which is going to happen next week. So have fun with this format one more time, because again, if you're like me, who's a fan of burn decks, if you like playing with some of the banned cards but still kind of want to play in a fairish way, if you are basically a fan of just being super hyper aggressive, as always, definitely give this deck a try, and I assure you, if you're a fan of burn like I am, you will definitely not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later!